There's an even harder and longer journey after the yes. And that is really around implementing your technology solution or implementing your solution into the very complex organization and environment that you've just sold. And so what we want to talk about today is what are some navigational tools, what's some advice, what are some pitfalls, what are some common successes around how startups and enterprise have engaged with one another in order to get to that ongoing relationship, more that longer term relationship. So in your opinion, from an enterprise perspective, why is it so critical and important in this healthcare ecosystem that we have today for large enterprise companies to look to new and emerging startup companies to work with?
Enterprises move slowly. I like to think, you typically think of insurance carrier and you think slow, monolithic. In some instances that can be the case. I like to think that our plan is pretty progressive. We move quick, but quick relative to what, right? So startups move very fast, but they don't always know healthcare and they underestimate the problems in our space. They don't know the business. And so I think the good thing is we can teach them that part of what it's like to get in the finance and delivery system side, partner with the providers that we have strong providers in our network. But what we need from the startups is the energy and the expertise in how to solve these things technologically and how to think very differently. You're not poisoned by the corporate enterprise thinking. The positive that we take out of it is your energy, your expertise, you know what you're doing in your field, and harness it, leverage it to be able to solve a problem like you just heard from Evergreen.
The other thing that's happening is doctors and our patients have become accustomed to having a really great experience everywhere else they go, right? They use their phones, they order stuff on Amazon.com. Their interactions with technologies have rapidly increased. And what that creates when you interact with the healthcare systems in particular is not a positive feeling. So my goal is to have that improved. The enterprise solutions aren't necessarily going to keep up with that pace. There's opportunity for startups to fill in the gaps. They're not going to replace probably our patient portal, sure, but they may be a snap-on to an enterprise solution that can be much more innovative, much more cost-effective than you might see otherwise.
So from the enterprise perspective, there's definitely a benefit and an opportunity for them to work with startups. What are some of the risks that you see from the enterprise perspective in engaging with a newer, younger company? And how can enterprise companies potentially mitigate those risks in working with a startup?
First of all, there's a risk that the enterprise could kill your spirit, right? I mean, you come in with this energy and you're going to fix all these problems, and then you deal with an enterprise that moves at a monolithic pace in some respects. We have folks that come in and just assume we're going to integrate, and that's not going to happen. There's not going to be an integration. If anything, maybe there's something in the cloud, but this is going to be something that works outside of the infrastructure because of the security, HIPAA, and all of the problems that go on inside an enterprise system. So sometimes their expectations just need to come down a little bit. And when we work with entrepreneurs that get it and can move and think through, sometimes though entrepreneurs hang on to what they want to do very tightly. That's a problem. So I would say the ability to adapt is important.
The risk is going to be, it's really easy to lose faith of the organization really quickly. And startups, their traditional model, in our experience with EHRWorks, is it's rapid deployment, right? And it's nightly deployments of new features, which is great and exciting to healthcare professionals who aren't used to being told yes and to having new features come out that quickly. But if you start putting things into production, particularly things that touch patients, it'll be over immediately. So it helps to mitigate that, to have a strong advocate in the company that you're working with. You need to find someone who understands the system well, who can advocate on your behalf to sort of help sort of massage some of those pain points, because they will come up. But you definitely have to be careful about change. And it's counterintuitive to, I think, how a lot of startups may function, but it's really important when you're working with an enterprise to manage that effectively. You have to really test what goes into prod. There's zero room for error. So being really stringent about quality control is important. To think that you can do integration with a healthcare facility using the technologies that perhaps startups are used to using is definitely a stretch. And so I would say you need to come in expecting to go back in time and to use old technology. So the ability to be flexible in that definitely really helps.
Based on your work and your respective enterprises, what advice would you give to the startups here and the entrepreneurs here that are looking for kind of their early on contracts with enterprise companies?
What I would urge you to think about is, one, be flexible. You have to be willing to work with, collaborate with, and in some instances, you may have to work with a competitor. You may have to work with another company, and health plans want to implement as few vendor solutions as possible. And so I just say, be open early on, protect your IP, but understand that you may need to be flexible and that you just have to learn and grow. And be very clear about the problem that you're trying to solve. If you go too narrow and you don't have the ability to then scale back, that becomes a problem. And so be focused, but be flexible, I guess would be the best advice I could give.
You need at the start of the project really clearly define what's going to make it successful. Particularly with startups, during the EHR Works implementation, we noticed this. There are ideas happening constantly throughout the project, and there are new business ideas that have nothing to do with what you guys are there to do. And they're great ideas, and sometimes they'll pitch them to the clinic, and the clinic will say, that's a great idea, but if you ever want to get something done in healthcare, you have to define it small and keep focused on it. So you have to keep checking in on what's the goal, what's going to make this successful as an implementation.
The question is, what do you think about the earlier comment that startups need to be patient for 12 to 18 months? Given the pace of business, regular and technology change, do you think that that's reasonable? And if so, how so?
I think there's a balance. There is kind of pace of change, and I would clarify technology change versus business, how health plans in particular as an enterprise, how business development cycles work, right? Healthcare is not going to change dramatically, right? How the site of care, technology interventions, technology itself may change and adapt, but our models are, not going to change overnight. And so I do think, and I agree with Chris, you need to have sustainability to be able to hang in there long enough for the business development cycle to catch on. And then the other thing is, are we proving a concept, right? Or are we proving something to scale? Very different question, because I can do a pilot to prove that your technology works, but will your technology work to service 3 million lives? You need to be able to have a company that can withstand those ebbs and flows of a development cycle.
May I suggest a thought experiment here? I mean, a lot of, you're sharing very important operational perspective on how the world is and the obstacles one encounters entering the world. I think a lot of it comes from outside-in perspective, systems that you already have in place. But everything that I heard articulated earlier, if you take a patient-centric view, you can completely operate outside of the systems we have today, right? Because these are not clinical workflows. It doesn't have, it's not your core. And so the question is, if you took a patient-centric view and build all these things outside of the system, first, they don't have to be tied to an Evergreen or Providence or anyone else. And these things, frankly, it's not your core competence. So to me, it's an unnatural act to ask healthcare providers to get into that business.
The thought is right, and I think and sort of what I was just alluding to with regulatory requirements, like interactions with patients is an example, right? For the ability it should be super easy for a patient to message their doctor, right? But CMS will say, well, to meet your meaningful use requirement, you have to do it through a certified technology, right? And so it makes it impossible almost for us to do some of those things organically, I guess I would say. So we're sort of forced to live in the world of that we're in. I don't think we're necessarily saying it's ideal by any stretch, but and I think we're looking for ways to augment, but not necessarily totally replace.
I think that's a wrap. Thank you so much for both being on this panel and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you.
Thanks.